Okay. We're going to skip through. We're going to taste the third chapter of Hallah because it's the last day before Yom Kippur, and after Yom Kippur, we're going to take the yeshiva break until the end of the month. So I just want to try to give a sense as to the third chapter, and we're very much going to be dealing with, I guess, times and measurements, and also with taste. And the chapter begins with a question about casual eating. And of course, we've seen the question of casual eating in the tractate of in Truma and Maaser Sheni. You can eat casually from food that hasn't had Truma and Maaser taken from it. You can't make a form like a fixed meal out of it. And we said, for example, when you carry the food into the house, then the Truma and the Maaser is really due. The question that this Mishnah is going to address is, well, okay, what's the equivalent of carrying something into the house when we're talking about Hallah? In other words, at what point are we no longer allowed just to snack on dough from the point before Hallah has been taken? And the Mishnah says, Ochlin arai mina isa, you can snack from dough until it's rolled up in terms of wheat flour. That must mean, they used to make bread that was a bit like pitta in those days, and you can actually still see the Bedouin do it. They'll roll the dough up into balls, and then they're gonna slap it in the side of the oven or roasted on the top of a pan in the fire. So you get these round pitta bread kind of things. And matzah was probably like that as well, actually. It was soft, floppy matzah in sort of round pancakes that you'd make by rolling the round thing out you'd roll it out into a round thing, and then you'd slap it in the oven or on a pan. So until it's kind of rolled out into a ball, you can snack from it arai, you can snack from it casually. And barley dough doesn't seem to coalesce in quite the same way. So for barley dough, the Mishnah says, vetitam tame, until it goes into a solid mass, ba'asorim. Barley has to go into a solid mass. And the Mishnah then gives us a terrible warning. If the wheat dough's been rolled, or the barley dough is made into a solid mass, someone who eats it is liable for death. This is death at the hands of heaven, not at the hands of a human court. But we all remember the Mishnah in Shabbat about people getting into dangerous situations. And for men, it can be climbing up a ladder or getting into a boat. And for women, it's childbirth. And certain mitzvot seem to protect from that danger, at least according to the Mishnah in Shabbat. And taking Hallah is one of these. And then the Mishnah goes on to say, as soon as, it's very interesting, this Mishnah is written in the feminine, by the way, and we've seen all of these Mishnayot that we've been learning so far written in the masculine. So clearly, already in the time of the Mishnah, women were making dough and taking Hallah. As soon as she puts in the water, so she's starting to mix the dough, Magbahat chalata, she takes up her Hallah. She takes out her Hallah. Ubilavad. Now here we have a mixed text. Ubilavad sheyehei sham chamisha rivei kemach. As long as there are 5/4 of flour there. That's actually according to the Kaufman manuscript, which is the best manuscript we have. As long as there are 5/4 of flour, 5/4 of a cup of flour, you can take Hallah, right? That's sort of obvious, and that's the quantity we've learned so far. Actually, the printed editions and the Gemara have a different reading. The printed editions and the Gemara put in the word not, the word lo. Ubilvad shelo yehei sham chamisha rivi kemach, provided that there are not 5/4 of flour there. And that is a bit weird. Why should she lift out her Hallah provided there are not 5/4 of flour there. And the Rambam explained, and he explains actually quoting the Jerusalem Talmud. So clearly the Jerusalem Talmud has got the word not in it, because the whole sugya is based around the word not. And he explains, as soon as she put in water, she takes out her challah, even though after mixing, some of the flour remains unneeded and unmixed, on condition that the unmixed flour, that the stuff left behind, is less than the 5/4, which makes the minimum quantity. So that's the way the Rambam and the Gemara seem to read this Mishnah, with the word not. As soon as she puts in the water, she should lift out her challah, providing that there are not 5/4 of flour left behind unmixed. Because of course, then she'd have to take challah again, or the challah she's taking doesn't free the dough which she's going to make. And the Rambam brings a little, I don't want to say it's a trick, but he says, look, by the way, he changed the masculine here. If he says, when he takes the challah, or when she takes the challah, hey, this challah is for the dough, and for the leavening, and for the flour left behind once it's finished. So maybe when you take the challah, you include all the dough, that all the flour which is left behind, even more than 5/4 of a cup. Then what's in his hand is sanctified as challah, and this is permitted as explained in the Gemara. So he refers you straight back to the Jerusalem Talmud. Interesting that the Rambam knows the whole of the Jerusalem Talmud as well as the whole of the Talmud Bavli. So that's how the chapter 3 begins, with questions about timing, but also some kind of reminder as to just how weighty this mitzvah is. If, just by eating wheat dough before challah has been taken, that makes us liable to death. It's quite a serious Mishnah. And the Mishnah is going to go on to talk about taste. Someone who makes dough from wheat and rice. Now we know that rice is not liable to challah. So what's the division? At what point does it become liable? And the Mishnah says, Im yesh ba ta'am dagan. So it seems as though the quantity is not important. It's not like the truma and the truma that we've been learning about up till now, which can be nullified, by being in a quantity of 100 to 1 or 101 to 1. It's the taste that matters here. We've seen, by the way, this question of taste in terms of mixtures of foods for challah. If it has a taste of grain, chayevet b'challah. And of course, then all the parallel mitzvot apply. And you can fulfill your obligation with it on Pesach. So you could actually eat a rice matzah on Pesach, and you could fulfill your obligation of al achilat matzah, as long as it had enough wheat in it that you could actually taste the wheat. And conversely, if it doesn't have the taste of grain, it's not subject to challah, and you can't fulfill your obligation on Pesach. And the same applies to leavening. So maybe you take leavening from a dough of wheat and you put it into a dough of rice. Same rule applies. If it's got the taste of grain, it's subject to challah. And if it's not, it's not. And so that they asked, and this is the final Mishnah in the chapter, why do they say untithed produce of any amount renders food prohibited? And that's the basic halacha, that if you have a pile of produce where tithes have been taken, and a small quantity where tithes have not been taken, that's tevel, produce that has not been properly tithed, and you mix the two together, you can't eat anything in a mixture until you've taken tithes again. Minimal quantity. And it seems to have nothing to do with taste. And then the Mishnah answers, if we're talking about the same species, a pile of wheat and a small amount of wheat that hasn't had tithes taken falling into it, then the smallest quantity renders the whole pile invalid. but not entam. If we're talking about different species, what really counts is when it gives taste. When it gives taste. And somehow, a small quantity into a large quantity, if it gives it taste, it can take on the characteristics of that small quantity. Even if it's utterly overwhelmed in terms of pure, even if the quantity is a tiny, tiny minority of the whole.